Welcome to Slow Medicine Radio. Our host is integrative medicine Dr. Michael Finkelstein. Michael offers medical advice from a holistic paradigm, including both medical and metaphysical philosophies from the full spectrum of human experience. Slow Medicine Radio offers fresh ideas on how to attain a state of wellness that seems distant given the limitations of today's medical paradigm. It introduces you to thought leaders who connect the dots between theory and practice, examining health from a broad perspective with regards to medical diagnoses, conventional and alternative therapies, healthcare policy, and related topics that warrant further thought and discussion. Slow Medicine Radio does not prescribe to take this or do that. Instead, it offers an open-minded, intelligent, and practical approach to living, resulting in greater health individually and collectively. Here is Dr. Michael Finkelstein, the founder of Sunraven, the home of slow medicine in Bedford, New York.
Welcome to Slow Medicine Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Finkelstein, and we're here every Monday, 1460 on your AM dial, WVOX.com worldwide. And I'm going to talk to you today about the hexing of a medical diagnosis. What do I mean by that? I mean that when you go to a doctor's office and they tell you that, hey, you've got this, you've got that, in addition to whatever you do have, the words from the physician's mouth has a secondary effect on you. Generally speaking, it's not good. On one hand, a lot of people who are suffering with a condition of one form or another often feel somewhat relieved to know that there is an answer to what's going on for them. But shortly after the relief of somebody acknowledging and legitimizing your symptoms and says, yes, indeed, you do have this, once you hear what this is, it could be very consequential. And in fact, as we all know, sometimes doctors are not correct in their diagnoses. And so the impact of a misdiagnosis can linger. And clearly you don't have the disease then if it's a misdiagnosis, but yet you may suffer the consequences of the words. Let me give you a clear example. And this is something that I've recognized when I was even practicing it. I wasn't sure what I could do, but I knew quite readily that once I told somebody that they had cancer, not only did they have a disease in their body, but they now had a disease that affected their mind. The condition of a condition that is devastating, that is often associated with something that's life-threatening, if not going to shorten your life, is depressing. And that depression and the anxiety, sometimes the anger associated with that, frustration, many other very strong emotions, immediately starts to play a role in that person's life. In fact, the disease may be early, and yet the physical disease may be early, and yet the consequences and the impact of hearing the words could take an immediate effect. This has a formal term. That's called medical hexing. That means because we have elevated physicians into the place of authority that they are, where they have a certain amount of credibility and power, and we trust them, then what comes out of their mouth, the words that they use, often will really land deep. If your accountant who you were going to do your taxes with this month or next says, hey, I think you have heart disease, that's very different than when your doctor tells you you have heart disease. You can poo-poo your accountant. You can tell them, yes, what do you know? And, manage that information in one way. But when you go to somebody's office who you assign a certain level of credibility and you know that they have a certain degree of training and knowledge, that the impact of their words is far greater. And so this is an issue. If you've listened to this show, you know that I am very reluctant to criticize the medical profession, not because it's not worthy of some criticism, but because I respect the effort of physicians in general. All of my colleagues who I went to medical school with and trained with and studied with, I know for a fact, early in their careers especially, really had their heart and intent to help people. Sure, the institution of medicine and the real world out there can be corrupting, but that initial intent and the heartfelt desire of most physicians that I know of was to serve. Yet, So I'm reluctant because I don't want to just lump everything together, and I don't want to discredit a profession that at times is not only life-saving, but something that we are and should be so grateful for, especially in acute life-threatening situations. But there are times that I think the medical establishment and individual physicians aren't as careful as they can be, and that I will be willing, and I am right now, to share that with you, because this is something that I want you to hear so that you can take care of yourself, because this is the only protection from that, which is when physicians label a condition and they don't temper that with a clear understanding of how you might receive it and to prepare you in some way and to give you enough additional information and especially give you the time that you need to sit with them to fully digest what you just heard. And when physicians are rushed in their practices, they have very little time and they just blurt it out and say, move on, or I'll see you next week, and expecting you to handle a diagnosis like cancer or heart disease or something that's seriously consequential without giving you the hand, the whole, the hug sometimes that you really need, and the time and the patience to help you grapple with the information, then I think there is really something to be said for physicians letting people down. Today, I want to share a story and why I'm bringing this up today. I saw a woman, actually I didn't see the woman, I saw her wife, who came to me because her ailing wife is, according to her, dying of cancer. And she's had cancer for about 7 or 8 years, and it had gotten to the stage where it was becoming more symptomatic. It had been relatively quiescent for a period of 6 of those 7 years, but sometime around 6 or 8 months ago, she was starting to feel unwell, and a physician decided to do a screening CAT scan just to see how things were going, and found that there were indeed tumors in a number of places in her body, lymph nodes mostly, but one mass in her chest, between her heart and her diaphragm, not in the lung itself, but in the space in between. And the physician was a general practitioner and wasn't an oncologist. This woman didn't have an active relationship with an oncologist, so but she did ask her general physician. She said, "Well, what does this mean? I mean, you're finding this now, and obviously it's important. What do you think it means in terms of my life?" He said he didn't really know, so he was going to ask somebody. So maybe a couple of days later, he got back to her and he said, "Well, I showed your CAT scan to somebody else, an oncologist, I guess, and that person, I'll take this into account, the person that saw the CAT scan did not see the woman. She just saw the scans. Quite honestly, I'm not sure the person saw the scans, maybe just saw the scan report. I'm not sure. Either way, the information got back to this woman that she has somewhere between 3 and 8 months to live. That was what she had heard. Sort of secondhand, she was told that she had 3 to 8 months to live. That was her prognosis. That was devastating. Can you imagine? Can you imagine going to your general physician, you're 7 years post-diagnosis of cancer, you got a certain amount of therapy, you've actually been feeling well until recently, you're pretty active, you're not just developing some symptoms, you're not in devastating shape, and then you don't hear from your own doctor, but your doctor speaks to somebody else, doesn't even see you, and gives you this information. Well, just take it from me that this woman basically started to prepare for the end of her life and is still in that process. Whether or not it's accurate, for the most part, we certainly know this too, that it's very hard to predict how long somebody has to live. Occasionally, it becomes obvious that somebody's in the last couple of weeks or months of life because they're so debilitated, because one thing is happening after the other. But when people are relatively well and have findings on blood tests or an imaging study, that might be significant and may be troubling and concerning. The ability for a physician to prognosticate longevity from that point on, I think we all know, is at best a good guess. But when the words come out of the doctor's mouth that this is what you have, and it sounds much more definitive than it's just a guess. In fact, I question whether or not a physician should ever say that to somebody without really being careful, without really knowing this person, and without maybe perhaps having another conversation with them first, which would be, well, if I went so far as to guess or try to do my best to give you the answer to this question, which I realize also is an important question. If somebody says, how long do I have to live? I mean, it does matter, and you occasionally, maybe more than occasionally, do want to know something like that. But you also want to be prepared, and you want to know how strong that answer is, meaning how reliable it is, or if there's a lot of questions, so that you don't necessarily need to sort of resolve that that's when the clock will start and end. Because when it comes to longevity and that particular thing, we can really get pulled completely out of our life, our ability to live day to day, to enjoy anything that comes up because we hear this clock ticking louder and louder every day. It's got me to think today, and I'll share this with you, that perhaps as a patient, as people who might go to a doctor, the way to prevent this consequence is to be careful with even the questions we ask. Now, I'm not saying that this woman is at fault for asking the question. I'm just saying that sometimes if we ask a question to somebody who's not really good at answering it, we may get an answer which is not well constructed and therefore might really hurt us because of the sloppiness of the answer. So if our question then is a little bit cleaner, if our question is a little bit more precise, if our relationship with that person, in fact, is a little bit stronger, meaning that they know us better, then perhaps we can enter into that conversation. But so many of us complain that my doctor doesn't know me so well. So it's this type of question, which is exactly a problem to be asking when somebody doesn't know you that well. How do they know how you might handle such information, especially when it isn't so definitive? Another situation I was taught about when I went back to study with Andrew Weil at the program in integrated medicine at the University of Arizona. He told us about medical hexing, an experience that happened in his life, which is even more dramatic. He said there was a man in his 50s or 60s, so relatively young, if you think about it, who was in the hospital because he had difficulty breathing. And he had an echocardiogram, and which is an ultrasound of the heart just to see how strong the muscle of the heart was beating. And he was told that he had severe congestive heart failure. The word used was a cardiomyopathy, meaning destruction and debility of the cardiac muscle itself. So severe that his life was going to end soon, that he needed a heart transplant, and there wasn't any available. This was years before that became even reasonably common. And so he received that information. He had shortness of breath. And it turns out that overnight he had a heart attack and died. In retrospect, it became apparent that the ultrasound was mislabeled, had the wrong patient's name on it. He was given information about somebody else's heart. And in fact, his heart, while wasn't perfect, wasn't in such bad shape. Yet the information caused him such strain, such stress, that as a result of stress, he had a heart attack and died. That's a problem. That happens. This happens when we hear words and information that scares us, frightens us, alarms us, puts us into the sympathetic fight or flight response. And if something else is going on in our system that is going to be sensitive to being pushed that far into the anxiety state, things can collapse like a house of cards. So I want us all to think then about how we ask questions about our health from doctors. Perhaps first saying, look, I want you to be absolutely certain that the information you give me is my information. And you can ask and you can pause. You say, are you certain that the lab test you're looking at is my information? Is it possible that it's mixed up? Before you start talking to me. you might want to see it yourself. I always do. When I was doing second opinions, and I still give a lot of second opinions in medicine, I don't look at reports. I want to see the data itself. I want to see the lab itself with my own eyes. I don't want to hear from somebody else. I don't want somebody else's summary, because I've seen enough times, not frequently, but enough times, occasionally, the wrong information being labeled with your name on it. And so you can ask that question. Before you go any further, please make sure that the information you're talking to me about is really my information. I'm not blaming you. I'm not criticizing you, Doc, but I just want to be sure before we get into this. And then if there's anything here that is really important, like I have a bad disease, please understand that I know that if you say something that's sort of an extreme comment, that it's going to be harder for me to accept. Can you just help me just understand how I can deal with this information, how I could swallow it, digest it, and maybe more than just prognosticate for me? Tell me how I can do as well as anyone can do. Don't leave that out of the conversation. Please explore with me, not a prognostic, but if 1 out of 100 people don't survive this, or let's put it the other way, if 5% of people survive, which means 95% of people might not survive, I'd rather hear about the 5% that do. What does it take those 5% to do? I want you to spend time with me on that, not how 95% of people don't make it through. The issue that I will think you're going to recognize right away is that physicians often don't understand what differentiates the 5% from the 95%. This is why I went back to school. To me, it's the innate healing response, the information that I spoke to you about last week about the inflammatory background of so many conditions that is amenable to things like diet and stress management and rest and how our relationships are dealt with and our life's purpose and all these other things that I talk about in slow medicine. But the idea is that this is where the 5% can do well. So I want to spend time with a doctor who can talk to me about that. Yes, I need information. Okay, this is not ideal. But if a small percentage of people do better than expected, what is it about them? That's what we need. That's the question you want to ask. And frankly, if your doctor doesn't have the tools to answer that question, then maybe you don't ask that person that question. Because otherwise you're going to get the bad news. You're not going to get the news that can be put into the context of, but there is reasons to be hopeful, especially if you learn to take care of yourself. And I'll work with you, and I'll give you what I can. But understand that what I give you are like seeds that you're going to put into soil. And so what I want you to do, even as though I think my seeds are pretty good, I want to make sure that you know that if you cultivate your soil and you get your soil into ideal health, whatever I give you to put into that soil will grow. And that's what I want to talk to you again about today. I want to talk to you about inflammation. I want to talk to you about practical, because I want not to leave this with doctors make misdiagnoses and scare people to death. That's what got me started today on that subject. But I want to bring it back to you, what you can do. The best news in all of this, if you don't even wait for that to happen to you, but you start doing some of the things I'm talking to you about now, these are less likely to happen. When we talk in the concept of prevention, this is how you prevent these diseases to begin with. This is how you minimize the impact that they have in your life. So we're going to talk more about inflammation and slow medicine when we return from the break. I'm going to give you a phone number because I want maybe to hear from you today. If you have a story and if you have a question, one of the things that I know people often question me about is, okay, it sounds good, but it's so hard for me to change those things like diet. I can't give these things up. People can get very resistant. I know that. Let's talk about the resistance, because there's a way through talking about it, maybe even from getting support from other callers and other people in your community. And maybe you build a team of people around you that sort of help you do this. This is so critical. This is the difference, I think, between barely getting through and surviving if you're lucky versus really taking charge, not only getting to your destination, but enjoying the process, really having the energy and the mindset to enjoy life, not just go in or running away from things, but really just being able to embrace all of your life. Because some of the things that I'm going to talk to you about are ways not only of being healthier, but really of enjoying each day a little bit more. We're going to talk about that when we get back. So the number is 914-636-9888. 914-636-0110. 914-636-0110. Call me and we'll be back in a minute.
You're listening to Slow Medicine Radio. You can find out more about the show and the work of Dr. Michael Finkelstein by visiting his website, slowmedicinedoctor.com. Slow Medicine Radio is sponsored by the Slow Medicine Foundation, dedicated to providing community-centered, experiential, and reflective learning for individuals, families, and groups, offering educational programs, events, and resources, as well as insightful health evaluations with customized medical guidance. Dr. Finkelstein works with his wife, Robin Queen Finkelstein, at their farm, Sunraven, in Bedford, New York. And they invite you to visit and take advantage of this unique resource, including men's and women's groups and couples programs. If you think about it, much of what we experience when we don't feel well is a result of the fast world and how it affects us. Therefore, if fast is the disease, then slow is the medicine. Visit Sunraven, the home of slow medicine in Bedford, New York. Go to slowmedicinedoctor.com or call 914-218-3113. And thank you for tuning in Mondays at 5 p.m. right here on 1460 WVOX.
Well, welcome back to Slow Medicine Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Finkelstein. You're listening to WVOX AM 1460, and you may be online listening to WVOX.com. Either way, you're here with me, and we're talking about slow medicine and how this is perhaps what can make the most difference in your life. Let's say you're well right now. Let's say you're hoping to be well for a long time ahead. How are you going to increase your chances of having that happen? Or let's say you are starting to evolve symptoms of a condition. Maybe you've just been told about it, or maybe you're pretty much tuned into the fact that something is going on. You know that. Like a lot of people, maybe you're not rushing to go to a doctor to find out bad news. So you're sort of in some state of holding on, hoping that maybe it'll go away. How do you improve the chances, the likelihood that it does? Because it could. Or perhaps you really have a condition you know about, and that clock is ticking for you. Or perhaps you're just so frustrated and aggravated because you're taking medications for it now, and you're worried about the consequences of taking the medications and the interactions and the hassles and everything else that goes along with that. What's interesting is that the answer is the same. If you understand that inflammation is the root cause of most of the conditions that fall into the category of chronic illness, then that's the first step. Just think about it. Any condition that ends with the Latin suffix itis, like gastroenteritis, or neuritis, or arthritis. These are all conditions that have inflammation that is contributing to the manifestation of symptoms, and even for some of those, the etiology, in other words, the cause of those conditions to begin with. Yes, there may be other factors involved. There may have been injuries. There may be age. There may be a certain amount of wear and tear. There may have been previous infections. There may have been a lot of other things that have gone into it, genetics as well. But the difference between one person and the other who has so many of the same variables that are set up for what we experience, or even brothers who share a bunch of the same genetics and environment, the manifestation difference has a lot to do with the other things that go on in that person's life in the category of inflammation. And most of what we do in our day-to-day is either going to be inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. And without thinking about it, without being clear on it, we may inadvertently just wind up doing a lot of things that are inflammatory. The most obvious example are two. One is food and how we handle our diets, our choices. And the other is stress, whether or not we effectively manage how we handle stress and how we live through our lives with all of the ups and downs and the bumps and the curves. And so with those two alone, people manage stress a little bit and work on their diet a moderate amount, there can be dramatic changes in the symptomatology. And for some conditions, there could be nearly complete or at least symptom-free results, which might be an effective resolution, the entire resolution of the condition, if it's only the symptoms that bother us. Even a disease like cancer, or a disease set like cancer, often affected by inflammation. When somebody has metastatic cancer, as an example, and let's say it's in the lung, metastatic to the lung, and people often are familiar with one of the consequences of that are pleural effusions. Fluid leaks out around the lung because of the irritation and creates a pool of water or fluid in the chest cavity, which limits the breathing, the expansion of the lung, and so people are short of breath and often wind up with lung, tapping the fluid out of the lungs. It's not pleasant. That's an inflammatory process. Now, I'm not here to make exaggerated claims that an anti-inflammatory diet or anti-inflammatory life could get rid of that entirely. But the impact can be significant. And the other question I have is, why wouldn't you want to try that? Because let's say it was only marginal in terms of a difference, it still would be rather significant and helpful if you could. So I want to get to the subject of inflammation again. I want to hear from you. The number is 914-636-0110, and I know somebody is on the line, so let's start there. Thank you for calling Slow Medicine Radio.
Hi, Doctor. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. This is Ken calling in from Bronxville.
Yeah, hi, Ken.
Hi. I was listening to the show before, and I just wanted to touch on some of the points that you were making regarding receiving distressing news like that from a healthcare provider, and that, whether the information would be true or not true and what effects it can have on your body. And I was wondering, how many times, would you say that when let's say, for instance, if a healthcare provider says that you have, a certain condition, maybe not to the drastic extent that the patient would ultimately die, but just that there's a health-related problem and that they're put on medication for that problem, when in actuality either the problem is not that severe where it requires the medication, or perhaps something may have been crossed up along the way, and that they don't, in fact, actually have that issue, and that the medication would actually be detrimental to them.
Yeah. Well, so you're asking, how often does that happen?
Right.
Well, let me give you couple of answers to that, because there's different conditions, of course, and they may have slightly different frequencies of that happening. But let's say you go to a doctor, and I'm going to take something very minor, relatively speaking. You have a sore throat. Roughly 50% of people who have a sore throat and go to the doctor who wind up with antibiotics don't need antibiotics, maybe more. Is that a big enough number for you?
Yeah.
So that's significant, right? So because most causes of the sore throat, pharyngitis, are viral or allergic. And even if some of them are bacterial, like strep, a lot of people would normally resolve that condition, if their immune system was healthy, in a couple of days without antibiotics. There are reasons to err on the side occasionally of giving antibiotics, because, let's say, in a young child, you don't want meningitis to be the consequence of an ear infection, which is another similar category. But the statistics show that it's at least 50% of the time antibiotics are used. They are not necessary for the individual. More important than that, consequentially, all of the unnecessary antibiotic use for some of the most common conditions lead to resistance in the bacteria that exists in nature, in the world, that infect us. And as a result, for those people who do wind up with true infections, the likelihood that they're going to have a resistant organism grows every time somebody gets an inappropriate dose of an antibiotic. And here's another problem. Where do you think those antibiotics go after you swallow them?
It goes through your intestines, into your stomach. Some of that medication can actually wreak havoc on your stomach, digestive system.
Yeah, well, after it goes into your stomach, it goes out into the waist, right, and into eventually the ocean.
Right.
You know the oceans have almost every known medication that's measurable. The ocean is full of antibiotics, full of antidepressants, full of chemotherapeutic agents. And so the ecosystem in the ocean is being shifted, and the soils. So this is not only consequential for the individual, but this is a big problem. So that's a sore throat. That's minor. That's common. You know, you can get through your life. Yes, you may have your digestive tract messed up a little bit. Let's talk about something next level. The next level would be back pain. It may be the most common cause of a doctor's visit. And so doctors are nice to you. They know you're in pain. They want to give you something to relieve your pain. And they really have two types of choices. One is just a pure analgesic, pain reliever. Tylenol would be such a thing. It's too minor to really be useful for most people who have severe back pain. And the next level are narcotics. Okay, so how often then are narcotics prescribed for something like back pain, and what are the consequences of getting people started on narcotics? That's one half of the answer. The other type of product to use are anti-inflammatories, which could also have analgesic effects, like Advil and Aleve, aspirin. Those are the anti-inflammatories that also happen to have direct analgesic effects, so that they work by both reducing inflammation and by their analgesic properties. Now, that probably is a better answer, short term. But after a week or two of the pain, and you're still getting the medications, then you've got other problems with the side effects and the interactions. And certainly, if we go back to the narcotic group, then that is really consequential. What bothers me about the practice of medicine is that the answer to your question is, or what you're leading to is, doctors should have more things in their toolbox so that they can give you things that are more effective without some of those consequences. That they would have the ability to say, hey, look, you really don't need an antibiotic for your sore throat, but I want to help you with the inflammatory process in your throat because that's what's causing you pain and discomfort. I want to help your immune system get rid of the infection because you certainly have an infection, just not going to be one that's going to respond to an antibiotic. Or you have this back problem. I don't want to get you started on narcotics. I'll give you, maybe 3 doses to get through till Monday, but then on Monday I want you to learn about this so that your pain syndrome can resolve the process that led to the back problem to begin with, perhaps inactivity or lack of conditioning or, an injury, an accident. But I don't want to set you up for a secondary illness, which is narcotic addiction or dependency or constipation from the narcotic, which could lead to other things. And not to give you an opportunity to take this moment to address how you take care of yourself in general. So those are two things. Now, your question can go to the next level, which is you have chest pain or you have, pain in your stomach, and you wind up going through the diagnostic process, and occasionally, you're going to hear you have heart disease or you have cancer. Those are more consequential than sore throats and back pain, at least short term. And so those are bad. That's bad news. And so how often, back to your question, is that misdiagnosed? I would say that's smaller than 50%, substantially smaller. I'm going to guess. I'm just going to tell you. It's probably less than 5% of the time it's really misdiagnosed. Small. Doctors are pretty good. The diagnostic testing is good. Mistakes do happen, but I think that for the most part, they could be relatively accurate. But again, here's where I think it's missing. So yes, you have heart disease. Yes, you have cancer. But in addition to what I need to give you to bail you out so that you don't suffer, or die any quicker than you have to be, I want to make sure that you have the answer to everything you can do in addition to what I can do so that you do as well as anyone can. And I want to spend another half an hour with you talking about your lifestyle. I want to talk to you about what you're eating. I want to talk to you about how you deal with stress. I want to talk to you about why this is so important, because I don't want you to become just strictly dependent on my medicines. I want us to work together collaboratively in this practice. That's the ideal medical encounter. And even if that's only 5% of the time in those major conditions, that there's a true mistake, 95% of the time, 100% of the time, that additional 30 minutes of investment of time will help you.
I see. Yeah, that... No, I mean, it definitely makes sense. I've seen I know that I was just reading an article not too long ago that said that zithromycin, because I know nowadays Z-Paks are extremely popular for upper respiratory infections and the like, and it said that now that it's actually affecting or could affect heart rhythms.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
And
so the consequences of medicines are can cause other conditions or precipitate them. So this, this is the reason why most physicians learn in medical school be very judicious when you prescribe medications. But the demands in practice, especially when you don't have a lot of time, and especially when patients expect something. This is another factor. And again, this is not to blame individuals who come into a doctor's office not feeling so good. They want, of course, help. So you expect some help. But in our questioning of a physician, how can you help me? Please don't give me medications unless it's absolutely necessary. But please spend time with me, talking to me about the other things I can do that are not medications if you think they will help me. And please let me know if you haven't studied that in medical school and don't know, but don't tell me not to try to figure this out. When doctors go so far as to don't bother doing that, don't deal with your emotions, don't worry about stress, this is not a stress condition, and as if that has nothing to do with your healing response, that to me is, frankly, malpractice. That's not okay. There's a lot of research now. There's unavoidable volumes of data to suggest that the stress response has a lot to do with how we respond and how our healing response works for every condition that we can name. So a doctor is obligated, in my opinion, to spend time with you talking about that. They may not be the person who has the most knowledge, but they should open that door for you, and they should encourage you and make it possible for you to feel really confident and join you in that process, so that it's not just all about their medicines. The quick fix days, to me, are gone if you're talking about high-quality medicine. It's not about a pill. Occasionally pills work. If you have appendicitis, you need a knife. It's good to get the appendix taken out. I get that. But for somewhere like 90, 95% of all ailments that we have, all symptoms we have, we don't need pills or knives. Time would heal a lot of those things, and we would need less time to heal if we were given advice that included this anti-inflammatory life.
Yes, I'm actually a big proponent of that. That when it comes to stress, if you can find a way to actually manage the stress that's going through your body, you'll actually alleviate a lot of the symptoms. And in fact, in a lot of cases, you won't come down with a lot of different viruses and things that are in the air.
Exactly, because your immune system is going to be in better shape. Because stress impairs the immune system. And so, so I have a question for you, if you're willing to answer it. I'll turn the table.
Sure.
So, obviously, you know this. Stress can have its effects on us. And maybe you know also that, well, if I improved the quality of the food that I ate, meaning my diet was anti-inflammatory, then I would also probably do better with whatever symptom I had and whatever I might wind up being at risk for later on. But when you think about yourself, or you hear from other people that you're close with, when they hear that advice or they know this, and they don't find it easy to do any of these things. They don't find it easy to sort of give up the ice cream or put down the bread, or, that they want to do what they want to do. What do you think goes into that?
Well, I would say that I know myself personally that I have tried to get rid of a lot of the refined sugars, tried to eat organically. Bread, I do know, is one of the weaknesses that I have, that I definitely enjoy eating bread. I know if it's there on the table at dinner, or I know that if it's in the house, I know that just sometimes I'll just reach for it, and I know that that's not really, that I shouldn't be doing it, but it's just something that I've always had a desire for. I have seen other family members that, if they eat candy or a lot of any type of sugar, candy bars, any of that stuff, that a little while later they'll complain that, oh, my body's crashing and I feel horrible and I feel horrible the next day. It's almost like a toxin. And but they can understand that where it's coming from, but sometimes they just can't help themselves.
Yeah.
And that they see it and that they either need that quick energy boost. Myself, what I've tried to do is replace that with different fruits and just even shakes, even different shakes that I make in a blender.
Yeah, this is what I refer to sometimes as, sort of a wheel where one begets the other. In other words, the more refined carbohydrates we consume, bread, sort of refined sugar, obviously, but even some of the fruit, the more sweet food we consume, whether it's natural or not, the more sweet food we crave. I don't know if you've ever tried, you have to sort of hold your breath to do this, but for some period of time, let's say 3 days or a week, to avoid that whole category of sweet foods, which includes, again, foods that are obviously sweet to taste, but that includes fruit, refined sugars, and bread products, which are processed flours that have a very high glycemic index, meaning in your body they may not taste sweet, but they convert to sugar very quickly. If you abstain for 3 to 7 days, you find that your cravings for them go away. This is what I encourage people to do, is get over the hump. It is a force of will to get you there. I'm trying to make a very compelling statement, which is, if you're suffering from a condition, a chronic inflammatory condition of any sort, chronic pain, arthritis, stomach problems, nerve problems, you have heart disease, you have cancer, and you're not feeling well, especially if you're symptomatic. And this works better when you're symptomatic, because what I'm going to share with you is you are your best judge to determine if it feels better, because if in 3 to 7 days after you follow this strict adherence to avoidance of all those complex sugary foods, as Ken, you talked about, if you do that, my bet is that a very high percentage of you, 80, 90%, will feel better in 7 days if you cut those all out. Now, that doesn't mean you have to continue that forever, but it would be a great experiment to undertake. Because what if you could, in 7 days of just not eating that whole category of food, feel better with nothing else? Wouldn't you then reevaluate at that point, 7 days in, to say, well, maybe I should continue this, or maybe I can continue it. I've done it for 7. Maybe I can do it for another 7. Wouldn't it be nice if I was feeling stronger, if I slept better, if my attention span was better? As a result, my relationships are better. As a result, my mood is better. As a result, my digestive tract functions better. As a result, I don't get so many colds and infections.
Yes, definitely.
Wouldn't it be a great moment in a person's life to experience that? But what we need to do to get there is to do an experiment on our own. Forget somebody trying to prove it to you or listening to me or anyone else in terms of any prediction. It's not worth it. But if I'm compelling you to give it a try, then you will be the judge. And in 7 days, you will tell me, you'll call me back next Monday, and you'll say, gee, you know what? I didn't eat fruit. I didn't eat bread, any grain that's processed. I didn't eat any refined sugars, anything sweet to the taste. No artificial sweeteners either. That's a whole other subject. But your body, when it tastes sweet, whether it's real sugar or just a fake sugar, still responds a certain way. Still inflammatory, believe it or not. And a lot of those artificial sweeteners are bad for you in other ways. They're inflammatory. So you have to cut out everything sweet, things that you don't realize are so sweet, like the bread products, which are highly glycemic, and even fruit, which is, I understand, we'll talk about it maybe another time, fruit is healthy. But in this case, to get you over the hump where you stop craving it, you would need to cut that out. So what are you going to eat? You're going to tell me. So that's the next question. Well, what do you now there's nothing to eat. Well, this is when you fall to whole foods. Other vegetables that are not so sweet, green leafy vegetables. It could be boring. Avocados. Yep, it could be really boring, this diet. We won't get into the subject of animal products, but this is when you eat eggs, and this is when you eat, good quality animal products, meats. This is when maybe you even eat dairy for now, although dairy is inflammatory. I would say ideally you would cut out the dairy too. It'll be much more likely you'll be successful and happy and call me next week and say, oh, thank you. So you'd have to sort of combine dairy to this approach, but you eat what you eat. So let's say you eat less. Frankly, most people need to eat less to be healthier. So it doesn't upset me to hear you say, well, I don't know what to eat for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, because I'll say, well, then just eat less. Eat half the calories you're eating now. Do you think you're going to suffer? I would say most people are still eating twice as many as they need. And so this is just, I think, a remarkable experiment to try. And I would say very few of you are going to call me and say, I felt terrible. Most of you will say, that was incredible. Your mood, your energy, your immune system, your inflammatory state, your need for medications if you have pain, all improved in 7 days. Sounds almost too good to be true.
Yeah, I would definitely take the challenge.
Yeah. Well, then can I do that? And let's speak in a week or two, and let's see how it is. Now, you may need some preparation, because you said something interesting, which I think is important here, which is sometimes people eat because they have this craving, right? I use that word, but you were talking about how people, you yourself, just reach for the bread. Sometimes maybe it's not ideal, but you still do it. It's there, and it's just a wonderful experience to eat bread. I get that.
Right.
Often that craving can be physiologic. That means when you cut out the routine of eating glycemic foods, you'll stop having some of that craving from a physical level. But on the other hand, there's this emotional craving. So if we're stressed, if we're upset, angry, frustrated, worried, a lot of people know that they reach for something to soothe that experience. Think about it. Where does that come from? When you were an infant and you were crying, what happened to you when you started crying?
I got fed.
Somebody came to you with food.
Yes.
And so now sometimes you were hungry. Okay, sometimes that's the reason you were crying. But little babies aren't always hungry. Sometimes their diaper's wet. Sometimes they're uncomfortable. They're too cold. It's too windy. Sometimes they have a toothache. But the first response of most young parents is to feed the child. Now, over time, that reinforcement, it's nice to be fed when you're a baby. You're held, right? You're held tight, close to your mother, close to somebody who loves you, obviously, nice warm bottle, whatever it is. That is not only a solution to the physical discomfort, but it's so emotionally pleasant. And so often when we're emotional and we look for relief, we go back to a precognitive memory of an experience. We don't even know why we're doing it. So we reach for the closest thing that's a comfort food for us. And that falls into the category of a lot of things. Cheese is a comfort food. Ice cream is a comfort food. Silky, fatty meats is a comfort food, because the prototypical food for an infant is breast milk with a fat content of about 15%. And so we crave, as comfort foods, other foods with a fat content of roughly 15%. The ice cream companies in the 1970s got smart. Before then, they weren't really designing ice cream. They just made ice cream. But they realized that if they mimicked the fat content of breast milk in their manufacturing of ice cream, they boosted it up from what was maybe about 12 or 14% to 15 to 18%. People would like their ice cream better. And they did. Haagen-Dazs is one of those companies. Friesen Glaja, if you remember, back into the 70s.
Yes.
Was another. They were the first to apply the science to ice cream. And so often our cravings are emotional, and smart food manufacturers know how to take advantage of that. But we then, as intelligent people who can learn about ourselves and how things are, we have to exert some control, some discipline early on to get over humps, because we get into these habits and routines. But what you said on this subject makes me add this comment, which is that by doing what I'm saying, which is to go on this careful diet, the way to make it easier is to deal with your emotional state at the same time. Think about things that help you deal with strong emotions like frustration and anger, fear, anxiety. Maybe the simplest thing to do is just to express them, tell somebody or write it out or scream, or people who are physically active, throw balls or something. Move that energy. Think about it intentionally. Instead of like holding it in, as we're often taught to do, understand that combining the process of some emotional care with the physical plan will lead to the synergistic effect of both. And then it'll be easy to get through. And just as an aside, those emotions, when they're locked in and they're, capped off, often get very inflammatory. Think about what happens when you get really mad. Somebody gets really mad. They go into a rage. What color does their face turn?
Red, purple.
Yeah, why is that?
Just all the blood rush,
right.
High blood pressure.
Yeah. So the anger leads to a physiological change in your system. Your whole system mobilizes blood very differently. It brings it to the surface. That is a clear effect of how emotions affect the body. We don't think about it, but that's what we see on the surface. Every single cell of the body is responding in some similar way. It's inflammatory, meaning fire, right? Inflammation, fire. Fire is hot. Blood is hot and red. And this is what we see. So this response, frustration, anger in particular, are very inflammatory. And so this is part of the mindfulness about an awareness of the body. This is what I talk about when I talk about slow medicine and a wheel of health, which has 7 spokes. And one of the spokes is the body. The other is the mental, emotional state. These are 2 very important areas that work together side by side. They're not completely distinct. We might talk about them one at a time, but in practice, in our bodies, in our whole lives, they are companions. We can't really extricate them. So in an effort to deal with inflammation globally, if we have a condition that we either have or it's brewing or it's really far ahead or we don't want it at all, inflammation is still the root. And this plan is more or less where you can go. And rather than wait for your doctor to tell you the real bad news, even if it's right most of the time, you don't want to wait for that. You want to be in a place where you're able to tolerate it. That part of the reason some people really panic and get so upset in response to information like that is they feel very vulnerable at that point, very helpless. But what if you're given these tools early? You feel confident. You have the ability. You could be one of those 5%. Because you know what you need to do. You have done it before. This is a very optimistic, very proactive way of living your life, not just dealing with symptoms and sort of getting through. Anyway, Ken, thank you so much for your question because I think it led to a very good sort of, working of this question, which is how can people really take matters into their own hands and how can they even deal with it when they're hit with some bad news? So thanks again. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
So, as I do toward the end of every show, I want to share with you, too, what we do at Sunraven, because one of the things, of course, that you can do is listen to a show like this, and then you can go home, you're home probably, or on your way, and you could take care of yourself. But the other thing you can do is join, as I mentioned earlier, with other people so that you can feel supported. Because doing this all by yourself, let's say you're living in a house with 2 other people, and let's say you say, gee, this is really good information. I'm going to change my diet. I'm going to cut this stuff out. Well, what if the 2 other people are still eating that stuff? It makes it much more difficult. And so you need or value support, particularly people who are immediately around you. But let's say the 2 people who are in your house just refuse, as many people will do. What if you had 2 good friends who really were all over this with you and did it themselves with you in their own homes with the same 2 resistant people in their respective homes, but the 2 or 3 of you really kept talking to each other, pumping each other up, supporting each other, spending a little bit more time together during this difficult transitional week. Community, then, is what the 3rd spoke of the wheel of health that I mentioned earlier. And so at Sunraven in Bedford, our farm, our working environment for all of this, we have community programs. And one of them is coming up on Saturday, March 18th. It's called, it's a day of slow living. That's what we're offering from the morning around 9:30 till about 4 o'clock. We have a whole day where all you have to do is show up. We will feed you. We will take you for a walk out in our garden. You'll move your body. You'll talk to other people. You'll get some more of this information, but more than anything else, you'll have this experience of being in a place where harmony and fluidity and connection like this is already naturally part of the environment. So it's not going to feel like so much work. Anyway, that is one of the things that we do. And if you want to continue that, meaning you really want to engage in this community at Sunraven, then we will be starting our seasonal garden co-op, which is a CSA, Community Supported Agricultural Project, where not only are you going to get produce for 26 weeks, a basket full of amazing food that we produce on the farm, but you get to do some of that work together. You learn about farming. You will stay, you'll spend time with us once a month with a potluck lunch and a whole community to support you. And throughout, we will be talking about more of these principles. Anyway, those are the two things that are coming up. I'll be at Gilda's Club on the 14th of March, and that is primarily for people with cancer, but anyone who supports them. And I'll just be around. And so if you want to reach me, find me at slowmedicine.org. You can email me, michael@slowmedicine.org. And I'll look forward to speaking to you again here on WVOX. Take care.